camera that was across the street from the actual beating of Tyre Nichols that caught everything on tape. And probably, if not for that video, if you've given it a watch, if not for that video, we wouldn't really have the full story of what happened here. So thankfully, there was a video there. And let me tell you, it was a brutal watch. It was really tough to watch. But I gave it a run through. First watch, I kind of started out in the order that they put the videos up there. And so here's the breakdown of the situation with Tyre Nichols. All right, Tyre Nichols is a 29-year-old black man in Memphis. Police body cam starts out with an officer approaching what seems to be a traffic stop that's being pretty aggressive. So this is not the body camera of the first officer on the scene or the first officer that tried to pull him over. But this officer gets out of his car, and it depicts another officer already approaching Tyre Nichols' driver's side door, basically being super aggressive vocally, and rips the door open, telling him to get the F out of the car, get the F out of the car. Pulls him out of the car, just yanks this young man out of the car. And immediately Tyre Nichols, he's telling him Tyre Nichols to get on the ground. And Tyre Nichols is not being aggressive. He's being compliant. He seems like a person who did not realize why he was being dragged out of the car the way that he was. And I'll do my best impression. Here's the tone of the officer. Get that out of the car. Get that out of the car. What, you want to get shot? You want to get shot? Rips him out of the car. And here's my impression of Tyre Nichols. All right. Tyre Nichols then goes to the ground pretty soon thereafter. There's now multiple officers on top of him. And he's on the ground. And they have, I'll just depict the situation for you. These officers, these aren't little guys. These are all big boys. Okay. I'll tell you that. Tyre Nichols, pretty skinny guy, not nearly as big as any of these officers. They got one officer holding. Tyre Nichols is on the ground. Okay, he's laying on his side. One officer is holding one of his arms. Another officer is holding his left arm. Then there's another officer down on his legs. And this is traditionally how officers will restrain somebody. Is each officer takes a limb. Just think about it. I mean, that's common sense, right? So they basically have him incapacitated at this point, but they are still being aggressive, and they are saying, one officer whose body cam is activated has a taser right to the quadricep thigh of Tyre Nichols. And he's like, I'm going to tase you. I'm going to tase you. Tyre Nichols is on the ground. Another officer is trying to put his arm behind his back. His arm is basically at his side right there behind his back. And he's saying, man, if you don't put your arm behind your back, I'm going to break it. I'm going to break your arm. Another officer, another officer says, if you don't lay down, man, if you don't lay down. Now, all this is happening at the same time. Tyre Nichols looks up, and right into the officer wearing the body cam, he goes, I'm already on the ground, bro. I'm already on the ground, bro. And he was already laying down. Well, the other officer, one of the officers says at that point, they go, spray him. You know what that means? Pepper spray. So an officer whips out the pepper spray. They spray Tyre Nichols right in the face. At this point in the interaction, and let me reiterate, let me say something to describe the situation a little bit more. Before Tyre Nichols says, I'm already on the ground, Bo, Tyre Nichols, while they're being aggressive and manhandling him, roughing him up on the ground, he says, look, I'm just trying to go home. And this is how he says it. I'm going to mimic the tone of his voice. You guys are doing a lot right now. I'm just trying to go home. That's while they're screaming at him at the top of their lungs, threatening him. That's the tone of his voice. So they pepper spray him. At this point, the body cam gets a little shaky. You can't really tell what happens, but within a split second, Tyre Nichols is now on his feet, and he is running away from these cops. He runs around the car, and the cop who's wearing the body cam tries to tase him, shoots the taser, misses him, and Tyre Nichols is, hauling butt down the street at this point. Officers go in pursuit. They're all winded, the ones that we see on body cam, and they're winded probably because of how much physical exertion they were just putting on Tyre Nichols at that initial traffic stop. This body cam is interesting because as it continues on, the officer wearing the body cam does not go in foot pursuit, and him and one other officer stay at the scene with the vehicles. The other officer that's staying in the scene was obviously got pepper sprayed himself in the eyes because he's over there pouring water on his eyes. The officer wearing the body cam says, yes, I got pepper sprayed, but it just hit my eyebrows. And for those of you who have never been pepper sprayed before, it doesn't have to get in your eyes. It's pretty irritating on the skin itself. So those two officers are at the scene, but they're maintaining radio contact. And the officer wearing the body cam says, Marvin and them are chasing him down the street. And then he says, I hope they stomp his ass. And the officer who is trying to wash the pepper spray out of his eyes, he says something inaudible, but it's kind of like, what did you say? And the officer repeats, he goes, I hope they stomp his ass. Well, anybody who knows the story, Tyre Nichols ended up dying from being beat to death just a few minutes later down the street when the officers did get a hold of him. They finally do catch him over the radio, and this is on the body cam. And the officer wearing the body cam stays with the vehicle, and the other officer who's getting the pepper spray jumps in his car, and he drives to the scene. Ultimately, he is one of the officers charged for second-degree murder in this case, among other charges. So that's the end of that body cam. But you know why that body cam is very interesting? It's very interesting because that paints the initial interaction with Tyre Nichols. And what we see is Tyre Nichols is stopped at a red light, and he is yanked out of his car. He's dragged out of his car, and the officers are being super aggressive with a man who seems to be super compliant and calm. And ultimately, when they pepper spray him, this is just a lack of awareness on these officers' part. I mean, how much of an idiot do you have to be to pepper spray a suspect while you got three officers holding him down? Of course, the pepper spray got all over everybody. Of course it did. And that it's not like Tyre Nichols fought his way to his feet at that point. When he got pepper sprayed in your face, your first reaction is to get your arms up to your face. But what it tells me is this: these officers who had control of his limbs then released him because they were then reaching for their face or their skin or what was ever happening when the pepper spray was hitting their bodies. That's what gave Tyre Nichols the opportunity to get up and run. And a lot of people say Tyre Nichols was running for his life right then. There are some people who would say that Tyre Nichols should have just complied. And I'm going to tell you right now, I think that's triggering for a lot of people, especially in the Black community, to say that Tyre Nichols, after being subjected to that over what was supposed to be a routine traffic stop, was supposed to just sit there and comply when he was already complying. But there are people out there that are saying that. There's other people out there that are saying that he was running for his life. If you want to watch the videos, you can. It's pretty brutal. But the thing that really bugged me, I mean, I hate saying it bugged me the most, but the thing that sits with me that I want to make a point to everybody listening to this is that officer saying they're chasing him down the street. I hope they stomp his ass. I hope they stomp his ass. What does that tell you about Memphis police? What does that tell you? And I'm telling you, I'm former law enforcement. So I'm telling you, if I'm biased anyway, I'm biased towards law enforcement usually being justified in using force when they need to, even on routine traffic stops. I'm biased that way. That's why I reserved judgment until I saw the body camera. And when I saw the body camera, I was appalled. And what this statement by this officer, I hope they stomp his ass, it means that Memphis police have a practice of people who do not comply or resist, they get stomped. There's going to be a point made to these people who run or resist. The appropriate thing to say was, I hope they take him into custody without incident. I hope this doesn't become a whole thing tonight where we have half the force out on the scene. I hope a couple guys can take him into custody without incident on this routine traffic stop, and we don't have to waste any police manpower on this routine traffic stop. That we don't need to do that. That we can be out patrolling the streets to make things are safe, make sure that the city is safe. That is the mentality of police, not I hope they stomp his ass. And a lot of people are calling for this particular officer to be charged. He has not been charged. Well, I'll tell you why he's not charged, because he stayed with the vehicle. Now, whatever he said there, I hope they stomp his ass, and maybe he did arrive to the scene later. You can't tell in the body cam what race this officer is, but everybody online is saying this is a white officer who said that. If I have to go based just off his voice and profile him, I'll say, yeah, he did sound like a Southern white guy. He did. But people are saying he's not charged because he's white. You need to charge the white officer. I don't know about that. I left everybody else to kind of, do their conjecture, but the DA's office out there in Shelby County is still doing investigation. They're not saying that more charges are not coming down the pipeline. They did move pretty quickly with the grand jury indictment here. So you have to applaud what the DA's office is doing right now. And, people can say that the DA's office is moving forward because of political pressure. Well, yeah, that's true. They are. But at least they're moving forward. At least they're moving forward. At least they've levied charges. I mean, sometimes in cases like this, you don't see a second-degree murder charge levied at officers. And so the fact that they took this step, indicted, arrested, put these guys into custody, that was a big step. But charging the officer who made that comment, as offensive as that comment was, they'll have to get creative in the charging document to be able to bring this officer in if he did not actually participate in the beating. At the very least, maybe he was on the scene with a lot of other officers who could be charged for not rendering aid, even though they weren't part of the beating. Okay, so let's move forward. Let's move to the second video, because that's basically the end of the first body cam. But that body cam is super important because it shows the initial interaction. And that body cam is super important because the next two body cams that we watch of the actual beating and the aftermath of the beating, these police on body cam are now recounting what they say happened at the initial traffic stop and what they say happened at the beating. And this initial body cam from this officer, and maybe there's more body cam out there, we don't know. I did see that they wanted to release some more, but I don't know if these other officers turned on their body cam or didn't have body cam or didn't turn them on. That's a whole nother issue. But this initial body cam is contrary and contradicts what these officers put into their reports and what these officers were saying on body cam after the beating of Tyre Nichols. So let's flash forward. Let's flash forward to the second piece of body cam. Okay. The second piece of body cam is an officer who is basically Tyre Nichols is on foot, and this officer comes and actually takes Tyre Nichols down to the ground. Okay. Takes Tyre Nichols down, and there's not a fight put up by Tyre Nichols. He's taken down to the ground pretty easily, and this body cam doesn't really show a lot because at some point in the interaction, the body cam kind of falls off the shoulder, wherever the officer's wearing it, and that happens all the time. Okay, I don't think there's anything nefarious about that, but the body cam fell off. So most of what we're seeing after the initial takedown of Tyre Nichols is audio, and the audio paints two stories. Okay, the audio paints the story of one officer who is, or all the officers who they are being aggressive again. Like, get on the ground, give us your hands, give us your hands, and everything about what you're listening to on the audio from the officers, and this is interesting. Everything you're listening to about from the audio of the officers makes it sound like they are meeting heavy resistance from a suspect and that they are using the force necessary to get somebody subdued and into custody. If you listen to the audio from them, okay? Again, when you listen to the audio of Tyre Nichols is not sounding aggressive towards them anymore. He goes down to the ground and he starts screaming. And this was maybe the part that I had the hardest time watching. Was he starts screaming out. He screams 3 times. He says, "Mom! Mom! Mom!" And at this point, we know that these officers, they've been pummeling him. He hasn't tried to get to his feet. 2 officers are on top pummeling him. A third officer comes in. And what do? They pepper spray him again. And immediately he puts his hands back to his face again, right? Because that is what you do when you get pepper sprayed in the eyes. And after the third time, he screams for his mom. And it was so hard to watch because while you're watching this, you know that this man is about to get beat to death and he's going to die a couple of days later. You're watching this after the fact. So knowing that outcome and watching a grown man yell for his mom, to scream for his mom in that moment, I mean, what else can you say is going through a man's mind? He's in absolute fear at this point. But then he says something interesting. I want everybody to take note of this. He wipes the pepper spray from his face and he says, "All right, And it's kind of a sighing. All right. Like, okay, I'm caught. These cops are going to do what they're going to do. Basically, he's giving up at that point. That's the tone of his voice. Okay, let's pause with what's going on in that body cam. And let's fast forward to the third piece of body cam. So this officer arrives on the scene after the mom, after the, all right. And these officers, they're still tussling with Tyre Nichols for some reason. And they're really acting like it's impossible to get this guy in cuffs. So this officer arrives on the scene and he whips out a baton on his body cam. Why this officer even turned his body cam on at this point, I have no idea if this was the action that he was about to take here. But he did, and we have this as evidence against these officers. He whips out his baton, and for those of you who don't know what a baton is, it's a metal baton. They whip out they're about a foot long when they're retracted. You take it off your belt and you whip it out violently, and it whips out to about 3 feet long, 4 feet long, and they're metal and they're solid. And to even get these things to go back retracted, you have to slam them with a lot of force onto the concrete to even make them retract. You see a lot of Secret Service, law enforcement carry these, FBI agents, and I'm going to tell you, if you ever want to not get into a fight, you whip out one of these batons. Just the act of when you whip this thing out, the intimidation factor, it's like this is at a 10 out of 10. But normal citizens can't get these batons. You just can't go to the store and buy these batons. Okay, that's how deadly of a weapon they are. You know, this is for law enforcement only, or black market. Well, this officer whips out this baton, and what he says is, "I'm going to baton the F out of you." He screams that, and he makes his way over to the other side of Tyre Nichols, to the backside of him, where Tyre Nichols is up on one arm now, still on the ground. He's up on one arm, and the officers that are holding him, they kind of back up a little bit. Why? Because they know that this officer is about to baton the F out of him, and they better get out of the way because this baton is going to do damage to anything it hits. And he proceeds to baton the F out of Tyre Nichols 3 times in the arm that he is kind of up on while he's on the ground. And I'm going to tell you, we haven't gotten the medical records. We haven't gotten the autopsy report. But I'll guarantee you that every time he was struck with that baton, it was fracturing his arm. I guarantee you. These things do more damage than a baseball bat. Think about it like that. So this officer batons him 3 times in the arm. That is interesting about that body cam footage, other than what we're going to get to after the beatdown, that these 2 body cams during the fight catch after the beatdown when the officers are kind of talking to each other about what happened and telling the officers who are then arriving on the scene what happened. But we'll get to that because I want to get to the 4th video now. The 4th video is video that is on a pole across the street. And if not for this video, we would not have a clear picture of what happened here. This video is on a pole across the street, and it catches the entire interaction between officers and Tyre Nichols and the aftermath with perfection. There's no audio on it. That's why the audio on the body cams of the officer is very probative as to what happened. But the video, this is what this video shows. One officer has Tyre Nichols on the ground. He's got him on the ground. The officer's standing over him. A second officer comes up, and for a second, pulls the first officer up a little bit, almost as in, if you're reading body language, ease up. Just for a second, though, because that second officer, after doing that for a second, then joins in. And we know and then they begin pummeling him with punches, both of them. They're pummeling. Boom, 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 boom. Okay, so they've just taken Tyre Nichols to the ground after they've caught up with him in this neighborhood. The surveillance then shows once they have him on the ground, a third officer comes up, runs in, and starts kicking Tyre Nichols in the face. Not once, not twice, 3 times, if I'm recounting correctly. 3 times in the face on a man who's on the ground, who's already been pummeled, already been pepper sprayed, kicks him 3 times. Then we see a 4th officer arrive. This is baton guy. We already know what he said when he whipped out that baton. It shows him whipping out the baton, shows him coming around, shows how many times he struck Tyre Nichols in that arm. Right after that, Tyre Nichols either stands up on his own volition or is stood up by these officers. Now, there's people who differ and disagree about it. To me, it doesn't really matter if he stood up on his own or if the officers stood him up. The fact is, what happened when he was on his feet. This is a man who was basically already beaten down. He really poses no threat. You have 4 officers standing around him, beating the hell out of him. He's on his feet. 2 officers restrain his arms. 1 officer on one arm, 1 officer on the other. And this is like something out of a movie. The 3rd officer, while they're standing him up, doing everything except holding him in a full Nelson, the 3rd officer starts laying punches down, raining punches down on Tyre Nichols. And the first one, I'm going to tell you right now, the first one, I would have been knocked out cold if I took that shot. I would have been knocked out cold. Probably would have snapped my neck. The first one came with such viciousness and velocity on a man who's being stood up with arms restrained by 2 people. Man, it really snapped his neck. And this officer came from 2 feet away, took 2 steps, almost like a super punch. If you guys watch UFC, and that was the first punch. The first of how many? 5. And this officer, I think when I'm looking at the body cam, this officer who's doing the punching, he's the biggest one out there. He's got to be the biggest, strongest one out there. So he punches him once, and then Tyre Nichols is basically out on his feet, and he's following Tyre Nichols around, and he's punching him again and again, and then the 4th one and 5th one. Oh my God! Talk about just really cocking your fist all the way back, measuring your punch on a man who's got his arms held behind him. And the 5th one finally rocked Tyre Nichols so hard that Tyre Nichols just went down to his knees. The interaction's not over. As he's down, a 5th officer runs in, kicks Tyre Nichols in the head one more time. What it appeared to me right then was, and I'm just reading body language here, this is a guy who's going to get his lick in before everything's said and done. He's going to get in his lick. Why? Because they're going to stomp his ass. They're going to stomp his ass because he ran from the scene. And they're going to make a point. Just like that white officer said back at the initial arrest, I hope they stomp his ass. Well, they did. And they made their point. After this, they handcuff Tyre Nichols. They drag him about 8 feet over, and they sit him on a sedan that's sitting there. And now the fight's over. And Tyre Nichols is sitting there. And that's really, other than that on that surveillance, that is really the telling part of that surveillance. Other than what it was also a very tough part for me to watch was, 10 minutes go by, 15 minutes. I didn't time it, but 10, 15, 20 minutes go by. And no one is rendering aid to Tyre Nichols. He's just sitting there. No ambulance arrives on the scene. We know a couple paramedics went over there and tried to talk to him. And you see Tyre Nichols slump over to his right. He just falls down on his right side at some point off the car. They sit him up again. He slumps back down over to his left. And if we flash back to a little bit more of the body cam of this going on, Tyre Nichols can't even talk at this point. He's just moaning. He's just moaning. We know that paramedics then asked him, what drugs are you on? Tyre Nichols, he is able to say one thing. He goes, alcohol. And they say, look, man, just tell us what you're on. We're trying to get you right. And the reason why they're saying that is because, look, paramedics and medical personnel, if they have to give you some kind of drugs, painkillers, whatever have you, they like to know what's in your system. If you happen to be in danger of overdosing, there's things they can give you to counteract that overdose. But Tyre Nichols, he says it twice. Alcohol. That's the only thing he had that night. We haven't seen the autopsy yet, but I have no reason to disagree with this man because there's a reason why in hearsay law, you hear that thrown around in court. Hearsay. It's hearsay. You can't say that. It's hearsay. Well, There's an exception to the hearsay rule. One of the exceptions is statements made for purposes of medical treatment. If paramedics or doctors are asking a person something and they say it, it's admissible in court because it has so much indicia of reliability. You're not going to lie to the doctors and paramedics about what's in your system when you know they're about to treat you. So this is where the body cam gets really interesting. So now the body cam is showing all the officers after the fact, and they're doing what anybody would do in the situation. They're decompressing from this really exciting, and I'm not saying exciting in a good way. I mean excitement, your body, your adrenaline, all this is run. And now they're kind of recounting what happened. And so the officer's saying, "Oh man, he's strong. Man, he's strong. He's so strong. He got to be on something. He got to be on something." Meaning that he's got to be on drugs, and that he's just so strong that it was like superhuman strength. Which would do what? It would tend to justify them using the force that they had to use on him. He was so strong. They couldn't get a hold of him, and he was resisting. This guy's on something. Because he has to be on something, because for him to resist those 5 officers, I got to say it again. These 5 officers, they are big boys. These are big guys, man. And Tyre Nichols is not. So that's the first thing that's really interesting. He's strong. He must be on drugs. Second, they say when they first pulled him out of the car, he swung on them. He swung. He was immediately combative. And that he swung on them when they went to go take him down. Well, we know from the body cam that is not corroborated. Okay. Tyre Nichols was never combative when he came out of that car at the initial traffic stop. Okay. He wasn't. And Tyre Nichols was not combative when he was taken down at the scene where he was beat to death. There is no evidence showing that Tyre Nichols swung first. And even if he did, it doesn't justify the beating they put on him. You got to use reasonable force. And here's the real interesting thing that they say on body cam. And this is the thing. This is why people have a distrust of police. This is why they have it. They say he reached and grabbed one of the officer's firearms, one of the guns in the holster. Tyre Nichols grabbed onto it, and they couldn't get his arm off of it. He was trying to pull that gun out of the holster. 2 officers corroborate that to each other on body cam. None of this shown by the video, okay? None of this shown by the video. And I'm going to tell you this. This is how you know this is a bold-faced lie. When you listen to the audio of the body cam, are you going to sit here and tell me that these officers on body cam, if they were meeting heavy resistance from a man who's so strong and on drugs and is resisting, as they're painting it on body cam audio, that when he actually grabs one of their guns and won't release it, and they're trying to, and not only that officer, but another officer, they're trying to get his hand off the firearm and they can't, that not one of them actually mentions it on the audio of the body cam? Not one of them goes, "Hey, he's grabbed my gun. He grabbed my gun. Get him off my gun. I can't get his hand off your gun." You would hear something. But there's nothing of that. It's just a recount after the fact. Oh, this guy was strong. He swung at us. He was combative, and he grabbed our firearm. And that's why this man is slumped over there on the car from the beatdown we just gave him. The body cam also has a recounting of these officers of why they initially pulled Tyre Nichols over. This officer, who I believe is the same officer that was laying those sucker punches on him one after another until Tyre Nichols went down to his knee. He says, the guy was driving erratically and I tried to pull him over and he wouldn't pull over. And then Tyre Nichols actually drove his car like kind of in a U-turn. I don't even know what this officer's talking about, but in a U-turn, almost hit the officer's car, he says. He almost hit my car. Came that close to hitting my car. I said, "What?" So we went to go pull him over. He won't stop. And then he stops at this red light and puts his turn signal on. That's where we picked up on body cam, because there's no body camera footage of everything this officer is saying for the reason for the stop. Our body cam picks up at the red light when this officer who's saying what happened is running up to Tyre Nichols' car, dragging him out the car, ripping open his door and dragging him out the car. So what's real interesting here is the Memphis police chief came out maybe yesterday, maybe the day before, and says they've been doing an internal investigation and they cannot find any evidence to corroborate the reason for the traffic stop. They can't find anything to corroborate it. That maybe this was an unreasonable traffic stop to begin with. Okay. What kind of things would the police be looking for to corroborate the traffic stop? I'm going to tell you from my experience in law enforcement, there's several things they're going to look at. Number one is body cam. Okay. If these officers are equipped with body cam, and we don't know that yet. We don't know that. But Memphis is a big city. Most officers have body cam. Usually you would turn on your body cam as soon as you're getting into any kind of traffic stop situation, especially if you think you're going to go rip somebody's door open. This officer, there was no body cam released from this officer, but this is what they would look at. Okay. But the Memphis police chief said something that makes me think there was no body cam from this officer. Either he's not wearing one or he didn't turn it on. And that's because they said, we can't rule out that there was no reason. Can't prove a negative. We're just saying we can't find any evidence to corroborate what these officers are saying, why he was initially pulled over. So what does that tell you? That if the body cam would either show the reason for the traffic stop or show that he's lying about the traffic stop. So what that tells me is there was no body cam. And if there's no body cam because he didn't turn on his body cam, that's an issue. That's a real big issue for Memphis police right now and these officers involved, given everything that just happened here. Matter of fact, they might be mad at the guy who turned on his body cam, right? At the initial traffic stop, they go, look, nobody turned on their body cam when we're about to do something like this. But I digress. Maybe I'm just speculating there. Let's get back to the point, though. The police chief cannot corroborate it. So first, they would look at body cam. Second, they would look at, and this is pretty important here, dispatch communication records. What that means is this. Even before body cam, this goes back 10, 20, 30, 40 years. You radio dispatch. Whenever you're out there in the streets and you're about to have an interaction, you're calling into dispatch. Hey, I got this police code of this and this going on. This is what I'm about to do. Requesting backup. Officers are all communicating through the radio. That's how they're able to coordinate. And the dispatchers coordinate. And the dispatchers keep logs of this. They're called CAD logs. Computer-aided dispatch logs, I think. And there's like shorthand notes. And every officer's call sign is on the side, on one column. And what they're communicating to dispatch is being shorthand right there. You know, reason for traffic stop, suspect in custody, suspect fleeing on the run in this direction, right? Because cops are not only listening to their radios, but they're also always looking at this CAD update on their computers in their car. So what this tells me is they reviewed the CAD and there's nothing radioed into dispatch about this reckless driving incident, about this officer about to go take this guy out of the car. So that would be a breach of, even proper protocol and procedure in the police department. But not only is there a CAD log, the paper, the radio communications themselves from the officers are all recorded and preserved. Okay. If Memphis isn't doing that, then they're doing something different than most jurisdictions, and they're a big city. All the radio communications are preserved. So they reviewed radio communications from this officer and the other officers who said Tyre Nichols was recklessly driving, and that's why they pulled him over, and they couldn't find anything to corroborate it. So at this point, yeah, you can't prove the negative, but the fact that these things don't exist, there's a reason why the police chief made an official statement and said, look, it looks like this entire traffic stop was complete BS. And so that's the breakdown of what the body camera shows us, why the body camera is important, what would be seen if you go onto that Vimeo website and decide to look at it. And just to harken back to this, the fact that he was screaming out for his mom, it really troubled me. Well, come to find out, he was about 80 yards from his mom's house where the beating took place. So when he ran from his car, he was really trying to run to his mom's house, and he was almost there. And he thought he was in earshot of his mom when he was starting to get beaten by these officers again, and he screamed out for her. And what I've seen in the press is that Tyre Nichols' mom has not watched the body cam, and she doesn't want to. And I say, do not watch this, because it struck me because I started looking at Tyre Nichols screaming for mom as if my son, even grown, after you spent your whole life raising this boy up, is screaming out for his dad. and I'm not there to protect him. And then he died.